What do you think when you hear the word campervan? Muddy fields perhaps, back to basic holidays, cramped spaces, small budget. For many it represents the simple life, a world away from five-star luxury. But what if I told you that some of the world's biggest stars, people with more money than we could ever dream of, own campervans and motorhomes? Today I'm going to be looking at why some wealthy people are choosing four wheels over five-star hotels. We've all seen the celebrities on the yachts and in the luxury villas, but some are choosing to spend their precious downtime in a campervan. The question is, why? It's not about the money. We will look today at why and explain, as some people just don't understand. First, let's get the multi-million-pound motorhomes out of the way. I'm sure you've seen the huge expensive motorhomes that are practically a house on wheels. You can see some of these beauties at the NEC Motorhome and Caravan Show, and I'll be visiting that again in October. And these vans generally gather quite a lot of interest, mainly because of the price tag and how luxurious they are. They really are something else. Are these mobile mansions really a motorhome? Perhaps they're not really as we know it anyway, but I'm going to name a few people who have them anyway, because there is a reason behind it. You know, some of them have been custom built, so when they are actually making the movies, it gives them that personal space away from everybody else whilst they're actually on location. A few people who have them are Will Smith, Dolly Parton, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jamie Foxx, Mariah Carey. They've all talked publicly about having these homes. You know, they could be staying in luxury hotels or renting houses, but they've actually chosen motorhomes, albeit multi-storey ones. This isn't really camping, it's actually just a five-star hotel which you can park anywhere on earth. Well, if you've got a road big enough, that is, because they are absolutely massive. But let's talk about something that's a little bit more realistic. Now, some of these people may have a huge net worth, but they are buying campervans that are in reach for us too. I've spoken before about my love for the Splitty, the vehicle that many people think about when you're talking about historic campervans. The original microbus, the Type 2 T1, which was later given the name the Transporter. That van often springs to mind. Even though it wasn't actually the first campervan, that actually came decades before, but it is the VW Splitty, the one that many people love for that nostalgia. And there are loads of household names of people that have actually owned them in the past, and some still own them today. Not just owners though, but actually use them. You know, some of the most famous ones are Jamie Oliver. He's actually spent quite a lot of time travelling in his. Jensen Button has owned a couple of different models. And also Richard Hammond, he's spoken fondly of his camping experiences in it. You know, Richard used to have an imported Brazilian Bay, a van which continued to be manufactured in Brazil long after production in Europe stopped. What Richard said about it really does sum up the why, and I will summarise that in a little while when I've actually talked about a few of the others. Now, interestingly, these vans were imported back then by Danbury, who are now part of the Vanworks group. And back then, they actually carried out the campervan conversion in the back. Even more interesting though, for us who like our modern campervans, some news I heard from a dealer this week is that they understand that Vanworks are going to be making the new Transporter Sportline, the T7 Transporter Sportline. I did contact Vanworks, but they declined to comment. But watch this space on that, because I'm going to be visiting them very soon. I'm going to have a nosy around and I can see if I can see any clues. But they are expanding, so maybe that rumour is true. Another celebrity, there is of course Ewan McGregor, a VW brand ambassador, and he's got a collection of lots of vintage vehicles, which does include classic VWs. You can read in the January 21 edition of the Volkswagen Camper and Buzz about his experiences which he had in a 1967 Westfalia. He actually sold it because he wanted to buy a plane, but then he realised he wasn't going to be a pilot, missed the buzz too much, and then found another Westfalia. He had that love for it and he had to go out and buy another one. But for these celebs, it's not about showing off the wealth, it's about taste and buying back a piece of that simple life. The nostalgia of these classic vehicles, which has now been 75 years since they arrived, it's the 75th anniversary this year. You know, we might not be in a position to be able to be buying those ourselves. One day I do dream, but there are loads of other celebs who appreciate this nostalgia too. You know, quite a few have used them on the wedding days. Tess Daly, Vernon Kay, Ellie Goulding, you know, just to name a few of them. These nostalgic vehicles, though, are more than just nostalgic. They are used as campers, as many people do. But we've all got different tastes, haven't we? We've all got different requirements which we need for our campers. Some people will love that nostalgia. But actually, if I was driving from, say, Cornwall up to Scotland, am I really going to want to do that in a 1950s vehicle? Perhaps not. I might want something a little bit more modern. Like I'm sat in now, I'm at Tamar Caravan Centre, and they've got a wide range of different campervans and motorhomes. I'm sat in now a motorhome, which is the Swift Voyager, and there's just another one down there I've been able to look at, which is the Swift Escape. An Escape, I think, is a great name for a van, because that is exactly what we do. But I'll come on to that a little bit more in a moment. Campers are used for many celebs for holidays, and I mean camper vans which me and you have, vans which are in our price bracket. In fact, I know that many of you have far better camper vans than some of these celebrities do. But being better is actually irrelevant, as my point later will conclude. Last year I met Joe Swash. Well, when I say met, I mean he held the door open for me when I was leaving the toilet at the Camping and Caravan show. I didn't stop him for a chat. I didn't really think it was appropriate for obvious reasons, including the fact that he was just about to go on stage and talk about his campervan lifestyle, which he enjoys with his family. However, that said, I do have a celebrity which he's going to be featuring on this channel very soon, who has a great story to tell. A story which I'm sure will resonate with many of you. I'm going to sit down when her diary allows, and I think that's going to be a perfect example of don't knock it until you've tried it. Now, some other names to mention here are Dame Helen Mirren, Nigel Mansell, Chris Martin of Coldplay, Julia Bradbury, Jenny Powell, Jeff Brazier, and even Max and Paddy. They had a camper van. There really are absolutely loads of people, and I know there are others too, which I'm also going to be trying to get on this channel. If this video goes well, maybe I might have a better chance. But back to Joe and his wife Stacey Solomon. They for years have been regular campervanners. First they had the VW T6, but then they did need to move up to a bigger motorhome. They do have 5 children, so it was certainly needed. Trying to have 2 of you and 5 children in a T6 transporter doesn't really fit. And Joe spoke really passionately about his family's experience at the show, and you can find loads and loads of photos and videos on his social media accounts. Another household name that regular camps is Carol Vorderman, and Carol does this without breaking the bank. Now she's got a slightly bigger camper van. She's got the MAN TGE base, and it isn't one which was costing as much of a house. One of the interesting features which Carol's got in her van is a log burner. Yeah, a wooden log burner in a camper van. Not exactly something you see an awful lot of in leisure campers. You do, obviously, before you do jump at me in the comments, you know, you do tend to see quite a few of those for the real van lifers, people who do live the van life, people who live in the vans. But perhaps the best example of everything here is Sara Davies. Sara Davies, you will probably no doubt know from Dragon's Den, investing in other people's dreams. Well, in this particular scenario, she invested in her own dreams, but didn't actually invest an awful lot. Her father was building the van himself, and he bought a base van for £5,000, and in total, for absolutely everything, conversion the lot was £15,000. £15,000 for a camper van. Just because you have millions, to have the experience, you do not need to spend that fortune. You don't need that latest gadget, the bells and whistles conversion with enough power for off-grid living. You know, we can want that, and I have to be quite honest with you, I would absolutely love to have that, but it is not needed to have the lifestyle. You know, Richard Hammond said, it's an instant base to explore from. You know, they have been to beaches, hillsides, and they've seen places which they wouldn't have seen normally. You know, they've played in streams, climbed on rocks, explored rock pools, camped at a farm, sat and ate chips, watching the waves through rainy windows. You know, all of them were storing precious memories, and it was entirely beyond value. You know, this really does respond to many arguments. It's too small for a camper. Well, Richard was taking 4 people in a T2 transporter, the bay window, the van that followed the Splitty, so obviously the micro camper, the micro bus. Another thing, camper vans are too expensive. Well, new ones might be, but base vans are 40 grand now, so they are going to be starting at that high price. But you don't need a new van. You don't even need a quality used one, as Sara Davies proves. She has a great income, yet buys a budget camper van. You could go on overseas holidays for that. Yeah, you could, but that isn't the point. A camper van is a lifestyle choice, a way of life, a means of spending each night in a different place, having different views, different experiences. You know, there is a reason why people who can afford to go anywhere they want still choose to go camping, campervanning or motorhoming. You know, you can't get room service in here. You know, there is no kids club. You have to provide it yourselves. And for these celebrity parents, that's exactly what the point is. It's about creating memories that no luxury resort can buy. You could stay at some nice sites to add some little extras if you wanted. But in the main, it's about being in the great outdoors, the countryside, exploring that lovely coastline. We're very fortunate to be living here in the UK. You know, the water might not be as warm as the Aegean Sea, but really, on many days, you can often wonder, really, would I want to be anywhere else? You know, whether it's a multi-million-pound palace on wheels, a vintage icon, or a humble family motorhome. The answer is clear. For celebrities, a campervan isn't a step down. It's a step away from the cameras, away from the busy schedules, and towards something that is real. It proves that freedom is the ultimate luxury. It isn't a cheap holiday. It's a rich lifestyle. You know, a lifestyle chosen by people who in a lot of cases could be choosing absolutely anything else. But this is what they choose. They choose to do it because of the fulfillment which it gives. You know, you don't need to be spending big money. You can do it for much less than you think, which I'm going to be showing you, like I've said, in some future videos. I want to know what you think. Do let me know in the comments. Is the campervan lifestyle the ultimate dream? I'm at the NEC show in October where we'll see some of the newest and latest campervans, so do look out for those videos. But for now, if you didn't see why I'm selling my van, then you can have a look at here. Or if you want to see how cheap you could actually buy a campervan for, then you can have a look at that video here. Thanks for watching, take care, and I hope to see you soon.